I stood on the porch of my house and looked at the familiar street I had been walking down for 70 years. I remembered the house on Chestnut Street in Salem from my childhood. Back then it seemed huge, full of hidden corners and family secrets. Now that I was 70, the house seemed smaller, but no less dear to me. Every floorboard, every creak of the stairs told the story of my life. Today was a special day, my birthday. I never liked celebrations, but my family insisted on celebrating. More precisely, Lorna insisted. My daughter-in-law always knew how to turn any family event into an opportunity to talk about what she considered important. And lately, only one thing had become important to Lorna: the future of this house. I walked through the hall where old photographs hung in frames darkened by time. My parents, my grandparents, myself in my wedding dress next to my late husband, Albert. 40 years ago, we moved here after my mother's death, and since then, the house has become a real family nest. Thatcher was born and raised here. I spent the best years of my marriage here, and I saw my grandchildren off to school and picked them up after class here. But the grandchildren grew up and went off to college. Albert died 5 years ago, and Thatcher and Lorna began to talk more and more about how the house was too big for a single woman. I understood their logic, but I couldn't accept it with my heart. This house was not just a piece of real estate. It was my memory, my roots, my life. The sound of a car on the driveway interrupted my thoughts. I looked out the window and saw Thatcher's familiar silver sedan. My son got out of the car, straightened his shirt, and opened the passenger door for Lorna. Even from a distance, it was clear that they had been arguing about something. Lorna was gesturing, and Thatcher was nodding with the expression he always had when he agreed with his wife against his better judgment. I opened the door before they had a chance to ring the bell. "Happy birthday, Mom!" Thatcher hugged me, and I smelled the machine oil that always accompanied him after work at the auto repair shop. He was a good mechanic, with golden hands, as the late Albert used to say, but in recent years he had to look for work more and more often. Workshop owners preferred younger specialists. "Myrtle, dear, congratulations!" Lorna kissed me on the cheek, leaving a lipstick mark. My sister-in-law looked impeccable, as always. A suit from a good tailor, neat hair, manicured nails. Working at an insurance company required a respectable appearance, and Lorna knew how to present herself. Come in, come in. I made roast beef just the way you like it." "Oh, Mom, you shouldn't have gone to all that trouble," Thatcher said, but I could see him sniffing the smells coming from the kitchen. Lorna surveyed the hall with a critical eye, as if appraising real estate. "Don't worry about it. I enjoy cooking for the family." We went into the living room, where I had set the table with my best china. Candles, flowers from my own garden, a cake I had baked myself, despite the arthritis in my hands. Everything was just as it should be for a family celebration. I spent the whole previous day preparing, carefully dusting every item, polishing the silverware that I only took out on special occasions. In recent years, such occasions had become fewer and fewer. Thatcher and Lorna came less often. My grandchildren called from time to time, and even then more out of duty than desire. My whole life had gradually shrunk to the size of this house, but even it seemed too big for one person. "Mom, we have a gift for you," Thatcher said, taking an envelope out of his pocket. "We thought long and hard about what to give you and decided that practicality is more important than sentimentality." I opened the envelope. Inside were several glossy brochures with photos of smiling elderly people. Oak Ridge, a premium retirement home. Sunny View, a comfortable old age. Green Haven, your new home. My heart sank. So they had made up their minds after all. "What is this?" I asked, even though I knew perfectly well what I was holding in my hands. "Mom, Lorna, and I are very worried about you. This house is huge. It's hard to maintain. What if something happens to you? The neighbors are far away. We won't be able to get there quickly." Thatcher is right, Myrtle, Lorna chimed in. We've looked into several options. Look at these wonderful facilities, medical staff around the clock, social programs, a library. You'll be able to socialize with people your own age. I leafed through the brochures in silence. In the photos, elderly people were playing cards, doing yoga, smiling at the camera. Everything looked very civilized and proper, and very alien. Sterile corridors, identical rooms, meal schedules, organized leisure activities. No personal belongings, no memories, no history. I understand your concern, I said finally, but I'm comfortable in my own home. I know every corner of it. I have a garden, memories. Mom, memories won't keep you warm if the heating breaks down, and they won't help if you fall down the stairs, Thatcher said gently but firmly. The house is really big for one person. Utility bills, repairs, cleaning, it's all very expensive. I listened and thought about how he had learned these arguments. Thatcher had never worried about utility bills or repairs before. It was Lorna. She knew how to present any idea in a way that made it seem logical and reasonable. And it's unsafe, Lorna added. Last week, the news showed how an elderly woman lay at home for 3 days with a broken bone because her neighbors didn't hear her cries for help. I put the brochures down on the table. Over the long years of my marriage to Albert, I had learned to read between the lines, to understand what people wanted to say but didn't dare to say out loud. Now there was something else behind his concern for my safety. What will happen to the house if I agree to move? Thatcher and Lorna exchanged glances, the kind of glance spouses give each other when they finally get to the heart of the matter. Well, of course it will have to be sold, Lorna said. It's not rational to maintain an empty house. The money from the sale will cover the cost of living in a nursing home, and the rest, well, it will be a nice boost for the family. There it was. I nodded as if I understood the logic of their reasoning, but inside I felt cold. So it wasn't about my safety. It was about money, about the fact that my house was worth much more than a lifetime of care in any of these facilities, and the difference could be very useful to a young family with a mortgage and 2 children in college. Mom, we don't want to rush you into a decision, Thatcher said. Just think about it. Look at the brochures. Maybe we'll take you on a tour of one of the homes. You don't have to make a decision right now, Lorna added, but the sooner you start planning for the future, the easier the transition will be. Planning for the future. As if at 70 I had some grand future that required planning. As if I didn't know that every day I lived could be my last. I smiled and got up to bring the cake. In the kitchen, I stopped at the window, looking at the garden that Albert and I had planted 40 years ago. The apple tree we planted in honor of Thatcher's birth now bore fruit every fall. The roses I grew for bouquets for our wedding anniversaries. The small vegetable garden where tomatoes and greens grew. All of this was to go to strangers or disappear under the concrete of new construction, and my 70 years of life would turn into numbers in a bank account that would help Thatcher and Lorna pay off the mortgage on their own home. I took the cake out of the refrigerator and arranged the candles, 70 little lights. Each one represented a year of my life, a year in this house, within these walls that remembered my laughter and tears, my hopes and disappointments. When I returned to the living room with the cake and candles, Thatcher and Lorna were quietly discussing something. When they saw me, they fell silent and smiled awkwardly. Make a wish, Mom, Thatcher said. I closed my eyes and thought about what I really wanted at 70. The wish came unexpectedly and was so clear that I almost said it out loud. I wanted people who talk about love and care to actually feel what they say. I wanted my son to remember not only his inheritance, but also that I am his mother. I wanted my daughter-in-law to stop seeing me as a problem that needs to be solved. But most of all, I wanted them to understand that some things are more valuable than money. A house is not just bricks and wood. It is a place where the soul of the family lives, and when the soul is sold for cash, the family dies. I blew out the candles and smiled at my son and daughter-in-law. Thank you for your concern, dear ones. I will definitely think about everything. We spent the rest of the evening in small talk. Lorna talked about her work at an insurance company, complaining about difficult clients and the unreasonable policies of her bosses. Thatcher talked about problems at the auto repair shop, about how the younger generation of mechanics don't know how to work with their hands and are used to relying only on computer diagnostics. I listened and thought about how little they knew about my life, about what I read, what I think about, what I fear. To them, I was just an elderly woman who needed supervision and caused problems. A person who needed to be disposed of in the most civilized way possible. When they left, I stood on the porch and waved until the red lights of their car disappeared around the bend. Then I went back into the house, where brochures for nursing homes were left on the table. I gathered them up and neatly stacked them in a pile. Then I sat down in my favorite chair and looked at family photos for a long time. In one of them, Thatcher, about 5 years old, was sitting on my lap, and we were both laughing at some childish joke. Back then, I was his whole world. Now I had become an obstacle to a better life. But 70 years had taught me one thing: never make hasty decisions, especially when those decisions concern people you love more than your own life. Dinner began quite peacefully. I served roast beef with potatoes and green beans and brought out a bottle of red wine that the late Albert had saved for special occasions. Thatcher praised my cooking with pleasure, and Lorna politely noted that the meat was very tender. We talked about the weather, about how winter promised to be harsh, about the new shopping center being built on the outskirts of Salem. But I could feel the tension in the air. Lorna kept glancing at her watch, as if counting down the time until an important conversation began. Thatcher nervously twisted a napkin in his hands and avoided my gaze. In 30 years of knowing my sister-in-law, I had learned to recognize her moods. Right now, she looked like a predator preparing to attack. Myrtle, Lorna began as I cleared the plates from the main course, Thatcher and I are seriously concerned about your future. At your age, many things can happen unexpectedly. Lorna is right, Mom, Thatcher agreed. Remember Mrs. Harrington from the next street? She fell on her porch in the winter, broke her hip, and wasn't found for 2 days, and she was only 68. I put the plates in the sink and turned to face them. So, the conversation was going to happen after all, and they were starting with intimidation. I understand your concerns, I said calmly, but I'm still quite strong for my age. I see my doctor regularly and take care of my health. It's not just about health. Lorna put down her fork and looked at me directly. It's about common sense. This house is designed for a large family: 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a huge kitchen, a basement, an attic. Why would one person need all that space? My whole life has been here. Life isn't walls, Mom, Thatcher interrupted me. Life is people, memories, and you can take those with you wherever you go. How easily he said that. How simple it was for him to reduce 70 years of life to a few photographs and mementos that would fit in one room of a nursing home. Besides, Lorna continued, maintaining a house like this cost a pretty penny. Heating, electricity, water, property taxes, repairs. Do you realize how much money is going down the drain? So we've come to the main point: money. I can manage the expenses, I replied. You can manage for now, Lorna said emphatically. But what about later? Your pension is enough now, but prices are rising. The house is getting older and requires more and more investment. Sooner or later, you'll face serious financial problems. I sat down at the table opposite them. It was time to find out where they were going with this. So what are you proposing? Lorna and Thatcher exchanged glances again. Then Lorna took a folder of documents out of her purse. "We've researched real estate prices in this area," she said, laying out sheets of paper with numbers on them in front of me. "Your house is valued at approximately $450,000. That's a very good amount." I looked at the papers, photos of similar houses sold in recent months, tables with prices, calculations of the cost of living in nursing homes of different levels. Everything had been prepared very carefully. "Even if you choose the most expensive nursing home," Lorna continued, "your money will be enough for 20 years of living there, and most likely much longer because most facilities offer discounts for long-term residents." "And what will be left?" I asked. Lorna hesitated. Thatcher looked out the window. "Well, there will be a decent amount left," Lorna finally said, "which would be very useful to the family." "What family?" "Myrtle, don't pretend you don't understand." Lorna began to lose patience. "Thatcher has a mortgage on the house, which we've been paying off for 10 years. We have 2 kids in college. Each semester costs $20,000. We're barely making ends meet." I nodded. Finally, the truth. "I understand. So you want me to sell my house and give you the difference between the sale price and the nursing home payment?" "Mom, don't say it like we're trying to rip you off," Thatcher protested. "We're just offering a reasonable solution that will help everyone." "Everyone? You won't have to worry about safety and everyday problems. We'll be able to give the kids a good education and not lose our own home." "That's fair, Myrtle. You don't want your family to suffer because of your stubbornness, do you?" Lorna spoke calmly, but there was a metallic edge to her voice. She was a woman who was used to getting her way. In the insurance business, she had learned to persuade people to make the decisions she wanted. Now she was using the same techniques on me. "I didn't know you had such serious financial problems," I said. "We didn't complain because we didn't want to upset you," Thatcher replied, "but the situation is really difficult. Interest rates have gone up. My salary isn't keeping pace with inflation, and Lorna's company has cut bonus payments." "And the kids," Lorna added. "Jessica wants to go to medical school after college, and that's another 4 years of education. Michael is thinking about a master's degree. We can't afford to give them a good education." "What if I don't agree to sell the house?" Silence fell. Lorna put the documents back in the folder. "Then we'll have to find other ways to solve our financial problems," she said coldly. "Perhaps sell our house and move to more modest accommodations. Jessica and Michael will be forced to take out student loans, which they will then have to pay off for decades." "Mom," Thatcher leaned across the table toward me, "we're not asking you to do anything unreasonable. You'll get excellent care, security, and medical attention, and we'll be able to secure the children's future. Isn't that what Grandpa Albert would have wanted?" The mention of her late husband was a blow below the belt. Albert really loved his grandchildren and was willing to do anything for their well-being, but he would never have agreed to kick me out of my own home. "Albert wanted me to be happy," I said quietly. "And you will be happy," Lorna exclaimed. "In the nursing home, you'll make new friends, have interesting leisure activities, and no household chores. It's every retiree's dream." I got up and went to the window. Outside, the garden was dark, and the automatic lights along the paths had already come on. Albert had installed them 3 years ago so that I could walk safely around the property at dusk. At the time, he didn't know that he would die before me, leaving me alone in this house. "I need time to think," I said. "Of course, Mom. We understand that this is not an easy decision," Thatcher said softly, but I could hear the relief in his voice. The most difficult part of the conversation was over. "But don't drag it out," Lorna added. "The real estate market is very active right now, but the situation could change. It's better to sell while demand is high." They left around 9 in the evening. Thatcher kissed me goodbye and said he would definitely call in a few days. Lorna shook my hand and reminded me that I still had the documents to review. I walked them to their car and waved until they disappeared around the bend. Then I returned to the house where a folder with papers was lying on the table. The appraisal of the house, price lists for nursing homes, calculations of the estimated profit, $450,000. That was how much, according to the realtors, my whole life was worth. The house my parents built, where I grew up, where I gave birth to and raised my son, where I spent the best years of my life with my beloved husband. All of that had been reduced to a number on a piece of paper. I poured myself some tea and sat down in the living room, where the fireplace was burning. Albert always said that a live fire helps you think. Right now, I really needed clarity of thought. Outside the windows, the autumn wind was howling, blowing leaves across the paths. Winter was coming, my first winter at 70. If I accepted Thatcher and Lorna's offer, it would be my last winter in my family home. The last holidays at this table, the last evenings by the fireplace, the last mornings in the garden. I tried to imagine myself in one of the rooms shown in the brochures. Neat furniture, a TV, a window overlooking the parking lot or someone else's garden, a bell for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, mandatory entertainment events, roommates I didn't choose, nurses who would treat me like a child, and most importantly, the knowledge that I didn't buy any of this, that my son and daughter-in-law got rid of me in the most civilized way possible, selling my house and spending the money on their own needs, that I had become not a mother to them, but a problem to be solved with maximum benefit for themselves. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. On the mantelpiece were photos of our entire family. Baby Thatcher on a swing that Albert had hung from an old oak tree. Teenage Thatcher with a fishing rod in his hands after a successful fishing trip. Thatcher the groom on his wedding day, happy and in love. Somewhere between these photos, my son had turned into a man who saw his own mother as a source of money, and I didn't notice when it happened, or didn't want to notice. The phone rang around 11. I thought it was Thatcher calling to say they had arrived home safely, but an unfamiliar number appeared on the display. Hello? Aunt Myrtle? It's Sybil Harrison, the niece of the late Albert. We hadn't spoken in several years, although we had always maintained a warm relationship. Sybil, what a surprise! How are you, dear? I'm fine, thank you. Aunt Myrtle, I'm calling about something strange. A man called me today and introduced himself as a real estate agent. He asked if I was interested in buying a house in Salem. He gave him your address. I felt a chill inside. What exactly did he say? That the house will be on the market soon, and he is conducting a preliminary search for buyers. I explained that I live in Portland and have no plans to move, but he was very persistent. He said the house was being sold well below market value because of the need for a quick sale. So Thatcher and Lorna had already taken action. Even before our conversation, they had contacted realtors and put the house up for sale. They were so confident of my agreement that they didn't think it necessary to wait for my decision. Aunt Myrtle, are you all right? Are you really selling the house? No, dear, I'm not selling anything. This must be some kind of mistake. I see. I just thought I should let you know, just in case. Thank you, Sybil. That's very kind of you. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call. I'm always happy to help. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. So, the decision had already been made. For me, without me. Thatcher and Lorna were so confident in the success of their plan that they were already looking for buyers. Our family dinner was just a show, an attempt to create the appearance that my opinion mattered. But it didn't matter. I was an obstacle to money, an obstacle that needed to be removed neatly, without unnecessary fuss. so that they wouldn't have to suffer from pangs of conscience later. I put out the fire in the fireplace and went up to the bedroom. In the dark, the house seemed especially large and quiet. Every sound, the creaking of the floorboards, the noise of the wind in the chimney, was familiar and dear to me. This house was a part of me, and I was a part of it. But for some people, even the most precious things have a price. I didn't sleep all night. I lay in the bed I had shared with Albert for 43 years and stared at the ceiling, where the moonlight painted familiar patterns through the lace curtains. I had sewn those curtains myself in the first year after we moved here. Back then, it seemed to me that we had an eternity of happy family life ahead of us. Sleep did not come. Lorna's words, the numbers from the real estate documents, the cold calculation in my son's eyes were spinning in my head. I tried to understand when everything had changed, when I had turned from a mother into a burden, from a person into a problem that needed to be solved. Maybe it all started after Albert's death? No, even earlier. I remembered Christmas 3 years ago when Thatcher first mentioned that the house was too big for me alone. At the time, it sounded like concern. Mom, you do realize that you can't manage a household like this? Maybe you should think about something more modest? I laughed it off, saying it was too early for me to retire. Albert was alive and well, and we planned to live in this house for many more years. But the seed had been sown. From then on, every visit from Thatcher and Lorna was accompanied by hints about my age, the difficulties of maintaining a large house, and the practicality of moving to more suitable accommodation. After Albert's death, these conversations became more frequent. At first, they offered me to move in with them. Mom, why do you want to stay alone in this huge box? We have a spare room, and you'll be close to your family. I politely declined. Living in Lorna's house, obeying her rules, being a guest in someone else's space, it was beyond my strength. Then they started talking about an apartment, small, cozy, in a good neighborhood. Think about it, Mom. No worries about heating, plumbing, or roofing. A concierge, an elevator, shops, and doctors nearby. I declined again. I had lived in a house with a garden my whole life and couldn't imagine myself in a concrete box among strangers. And now the conversation turned to a nursing home. The logic was ironclad, from a big house to a small one, from a small one to a room in a specialized facility. Every step seemed reasonable, every argument sounded convincing, but behind all this logic lay one thing: the desire to get rid of me as quickly as possible and with maximum profit. I got out of bed and went to the window. It was around 3 in the morning, and the street was silent. Only the street lights illuminated the familiar houses where people I had known for decades lived. Mrs. Connor from across the street, who walked her old spaniel every morning. The young Johnsons, who had bought the house to our left 2 years ago and enthusiastically set about renovating it. Old Mr. McDonald, who sat on his porch every evening smoking his pipe. All these people were part of my life. We greeted each other when we met, exchanged news, and helped each other with little things. Mrs. Connor brought me pies at Easter, and I shared apples from my garden with her. The Johnsons asked me for advice about plants. I had a reputation as a knowledgeable gardener. McDonald helped clear the snow from the sidewalk in winter, even though I didn't ask him to. That was my life. Not glamorous, not eventful, but real. I had roots here, connections, a place in the small world of Chestnut Street. In a nursing home, I would be just another elderly woman among dozens of others like me. I went down to the kitchen and put the kettle on. On sleepless nights like this, hot tea helped me organize my thoughts. The documents Lorna had left were lying on the table. I leafed through the nursing home brochures again. Green Haven, your new home. In the photos, elderly people were smiling at a festive table, playing board games, and doing therapeutic exercises. Everything was very civilized and proper, a daily routine, a medication schedule, organized leisure activities, no independence, no choices, no responsibility, life under supervision. Oak Ridge, a premium nursing home. Here, the rooms were larger, the furniture was of higher quality, and the residents had the same polite smiles on their faces. Premium meant higher fees, but the essence remained the same, waiting for death in comfortable conditions. Sunny View, a comfortable old age. More greenery, more light, the same happy faces in the photos. I wonder if these people were paid to look happy, or were they really content with their lot? I put the brochures aside and took out the photo album that was stored in the kitchen cupboard. The pages had yellowed with age, but the photos were well preserved. Here is our wedding with Albert, young, in love, full of hope. Here we are buying this house. Albert is carrying me over the threshold. I am laughing, clutching a bouquet of roses to my chest. Thatcher's birth, a tiny bundle in a white diaper, a wrinkled face, tiny fists. Albert holds him so carefully, as if afraid of breaking him. I remember that day in minute detail. The birth was difficult, but when the doctor placed the baby on my chest, I forgot everything except the immense love that filled my heart. Thatcher's first steps in this very living room. He let go of the sofa and walked unsteadily toward me, spreading his arms for balance. He fell and cried, but tried again a minute later. Stubborn since childhood, his first day of school. Thatcher in his new uniform, with a backpack on his back, serious and a little scared. I walked him to his classroom, kissed him goodbye, and then cried at home because my little boy had taken his first step into adulthood. High school graduation. Thatcher in his cap and gown, diploma in hand, smiling broadly. Albert and I sat in the front row and were proud of our son. He received a scholarship to college and was going to study engineering. At the time, it seemed like he had a bright future ahead of him. Meeting Lorna. Thatcher brought her home for the holidays and introduced her as his girlfriend. She was beautiful, confident, and knew how to carry herself in society. She was studying economics and planning a career in business. I didn't like her very much. She was too calculating, too cold. But Thatcher was in love, and you can't change the mind of someone in love. The wedding, it was a lavish ceremony, organized and paid for by Lorna's family. Albert and I felt a little out of place among her relatives, people with money, connections, ambitions, but we were happy for our son. He looked so content, so confident in his choice. The birth of grandchildren, Jessica and Michael, 2 years apart. I helped Lorna in the first few months, babysitting the children when she wanted to go back to work. My grandchildren grew up, and I tried to be the same kind of grandmother to them that my grandmother had been to me, a source of unconditional love, warm hugs, and homemade cookies. But as the years passed, something changed. Lorna asked me to look after the children less and less often. Thank you, Myrtle, but we have a nanny. Then the nanny was replaced by an expensive private school with an after-school program. My grandchildren began to visit me less and less often, first once a week, then once a month, then only on holidays. Lorna explained this by saying that the children were busy. Extra classes, sports clubs, exam preparation. Modern children have to be competitive, Myrtle. They can't waste time on trivialities. It turned out that the time spent with their grandmother was trivial. I wasn't offended. I understood that the world had changed, that children had different priorities, but it still hurt, especially when Jessica, who was 14 at the time, said to me, "Grandma, your house is so boring. There's no game console, the internet is slow, and everything is old." Albert was still alive then, and we talked about it. He said I shouldn't take it to heart. Teenagers are always ungrateful, it will pass. But I could see that he was also hurt by his grandchildren's coldness, their unwillingness to spend time with their grandparents. After Albert's death, the relationship became even more formal. Thatcher came once a month, usually on Sundays, drank coffee, told us the news, and asked how I was feeling. Lorna stayed home more often, citing work commitments. The grandchildren called on my birthday and New Year's Eve and sent cards with the usual greetings. But the worst thing was the change in our conversations. We used to discuss everything: Thatcher's work, the children's studies, vacation plans, the little joys and sorrows of everyday life. Now the conversations were becoming more and more superficial: the weather, health, local news. And then the hints began. Mom, are you sure you can handle the house? Isn't it hard for you alone? Maybe you should think about something more modest. At first, these phrases sounded like concern. Gradually, I realized that behind them lay irritation. I was an obstacle to some plans they were making without me. Money. That's what changed everything. When Albert died, Thatcher and Lorna thought about the inheritance for the first time: the house, which was worth more and more every year, the savings that sat in the bank account and were of no use to anyone but me, the investments that Albert had made throughout his life and that now belonged to me. I saw them counting. I saw Lorna looking appraisingly at the furniture, the paintings, the porcelain. I saw Thatcher taking an interest in the condition of the roof, the heating, the electrical wiring, not out of concern for my comfort, but to understand how much it would cost him to repair when he got the house. They never talked about it directly, but I felt that in their eyes I was already dead. They were waiting for nature to do its work, for me to clear the way for them to inherit. And when they realized that I could live for many more years, they decided to push things along. The nursing home was a compromise. I would stay alive, but I would no longer be an obstacle. They would get the money now, rather than in an indefinite number of years. Everything was beautiful, legal, morally justified. Caring children were placing their elderly mother in a good facility where she would be safe and secure. I finished my tea and looked at the clock. It was 4:30 in the morning. Dawn was coming soon. I went to the window and saw the sky beginning to lighten in the east. Another day in my house, perhaps one of the last. But what if I didn't agree? What if I just said no and refused to discuss the matter any further? Thatcher and Lorna couldn't force me to sell the house. I am of sound mind. The documents are in order. The house is registered in my name. However, I knew them well enough to understand that they would not back down. There is too much money at stake. There will be new conversations, new arguments, new pressure. Maybe they'll find ways to make my life so uncomfortable that I'll ask them to take me to a nursing home myself. Or maybe they'll just stop talking to me. If you don't want to think about our welfare, then we don't have to think about yours. Thatcher is capable of saying things like that, especially under the influence of Lorna, who will never forgive me for rejecting her plans to be completely alone at 70, without children, grandchildren, family, with a house that is really too big for one person, with memories that no one but me is interested in, with old age that will sooner or later make me helpless. Maybe they're right. Maybe a nursing home really is the best option. I'll live out my last years in safety and comfort. They'll get their money. Everyone will be happy. A reasonable compromise between my desires and their needs. But inside, everything resisted this idea. Had I lived 70 years only to give up everything that made my life mine? 70 years, only to end up as an elderly woman with no name, no history, no roots. The sun rose above the horizon, flooding the kitchen with warm light. I walked over to the calendar hanging on the wall. Today was October 4th. Yesterday was the 3rd, my birthday. Tomorrow would be the 5th. Time was moving forward, life was going on, and I had to make a decision that would determine my entire future. 70 years ago, my mother gave birth to me in this house, on the second floor, in the bedroom that was now mine. I took my first steps on these floorboards and spoke my first words in these rooms. Here I learned to cook, clean, and take care of my family. Here I became a woman, a wife, a mother. Was all this really going to end with the signing of the sale documents? Was my story really going to turn into a number in my son's bank account? I didn't know the answer, but I knew that the day would be long and that I needed time to think things through. While there was still time, while the decision was not final, while something could still be changed. In the morning, I woke up with a heavy head and red eyes. A few hours of sleep after a sleepless night did not give me strength, but life demanded its due. There was almost no food left in the refrigerator. Yesterday's festive dinner had depleted my supplies. I had to go to the store. I got ready slowly, carefully. Shower, breakfast, light makeup. The mirror reflected the tired face of a 70-year-old woman who had spent the whole night thinking about her future. Her wrinkles had deepened. Her eyes had dimmed. Age was taking its toll, and it was foolish to deny it. The shopping list was short: bread, milk, eggs, vegetables for soup. I didn't want anything else special. My appetite had disappeared along with my peace of mind. I took my bag and went to the bus stop. I sold my car 2 years ago when I realized that my eyesight was no longer what it used to be, and my reactions had slowed down. Thatcher approved of my decision at the time. One less thing to worry about. The bus arrived on time. At 9:30 in the morning, it was mostly filled with elderly people and young mothers with children. I sat by the window and looked at the familiar streets of Salem. Autumn painted the city in shades of yellow and red, and leaves swirled under the wheels of the bus. It was beautiful and sad at the same time, just like my whole life in recent years. At the supermarket, I shopped slowly, without rushing. I stopped at every shelf, chose the freshest vegetables, and read the labels. Time dragged on, and I didn't want to go home. At home, documents were waiting for me on the table: brochures for nursing homes, the need to make a decision. The cashier, a girl of about 20 with a tired face, scanned my purchases mechanically. She was probably thinking about her own problems: school, work, her boyfriend, the future. At 20, it seems like you have an eternity of possibilities ahead of you. At 70, you realize that most of the journey is behind you and only the finish line lies ahead. "Have a nice day," she muttered, handing me the receipt. "Thank you, dear, you too." The return trip took about an hour. The bus moved slowly, stopping at every stop. I was in no hurry. Let the day last as long as possible. Let the time between before and after stretch into infinity. When I got off at my stop, it was around 11:30. The sun was high in the sky, and the day promised to be warm. I walked down the familiar street and thought about how many times I had walked this way. Thousands of times in 40 years. In my youth, quickly, energetically, with a baby carriage or holding little Thatcher's hand. Later, sedately, with the dignity of a mature woman. Now, slowly, cautiously, as befits my age. I smelled smoke a block away from home. At first, I didn't think much of it. Someone was burning leaves in their yard, a common occurrence in the fall. But the smell grew stronger, mixed with another, more pungent aroma. It wasn't just leaves that were burning. When I turned the corner onto Chestnut Street, my heart stopped. My house was engulfed in smoke. Flames were shooting out of the first floor windows, and black clouds were rising into the sky. A fire truck and an ambulance were parked on the lawn in front of the house. Firefighters were unrolling hoses and spraying water on the front of the building. I ran. My grocery bag fell onto the sidewalk. Eggs broke, milk spilled, but I didn't care. My house was on fire. My home, my life, my memories were turning to ashes. "Stop! You can't come any closer," a firefighter shouted, blocking my way. "That's my house," I cried, gasping for breath. "My house is on fire." "Are you Myrtle Crane?" he asked. Your relatives are looking for you. They're over there, near the ambulance. I looked back and saw Thatcher and Lorna. They were standing next to the white car, talking to the doctor about something. Lorna clapped her hands when she saw me and ran towards me. Myrtle, thank God you're alive. She hugged me, and I smelled her expensive perfume mixed with the smell of smoke. We were so worried. We thought you were at home. What happened? I stared at the flames consuming my house. How did this happen? We don't know for sure. Thatcher ran up. We arrived 2 hours ago, wanted to talk to you again about yesterday. And then there was smoke, fire. The neighbors had already called the fire department. I tried to figure it out. They arrived at 10 in the morning, but I left for the store at 9:30, and there was no one there before that. Where were you when it started? I asked. In the car, Lorna replied quickly. We drove up, saw the smoke, and called the emergency services right away. Thank God you weren't home. You could have died. Thatcher nodded in agreement with his wife. His face showed genuine concern, or what was supposed to be genuine concern. The fire started on the first floor, said the fire chief who approached us. According to preliminary data, in the living room, possibly a problem with the electrical wiring or a malfunctioning fireplace. The exact cause will be determined by an investigation. The fireplace. Last night, I lit a fire, sat by the fireplace, and thought about my life. Did I really not put out the coals completely? Could my carelessness have caused this? The house can't be saved, the firefighter continued. The fire spread too quickly. Right now, we're trying to prevent it from spreading to neighboring buildings. I watched as the water from the fire hoses mixed with the smoke, creating murky gray clouds. The flames gradually subsided, but the house had already been reduced to a charred skeleton. The roof had collapsed, the walls were blackened, and the windows were broken. Nothing remained. 70 years of life had turned to ashes in 2 hours. Mom, Thatcher said gently, you can't stay here. We need to find temporary housing. We don't have a spare room at home, Lorna added. Jessica is coming home from college for the weekend, and Michael is preparing for his exams. We can't. I understand, I said quietly. I'll find a hotel. No, Mom. You won't last long in a hotel. It's expensive, and besides, Thatcher hesitated. Maybe we should consider the options we discussed yesterday? I looked at him. Was he really suggesting taking me to a nursing home right now, while the house was still smoldering, while the ashes were still warm? It's temporary, he added hastily, until we sort out the insurance, decide on restoration, or buying a new home. What restoration? Lorna asked sharply. Thatcher, be realistic. The house is burned to the ground. There will be no restoration. She turned to me. Myrtle, I understand this is a shock, but we have to face the facts. The house is gone. Insurance will cover some of the damage, but building a new house at your age, it's not practical. A man in a suit approached us and introduced himself as a social worker from the Emergency Housing Service. Mrs. Crane, I'm so sorry. I understand how difficult this is, but we have to find you temporary housing. Do you have any relatives you can turn to? She can stay with us for a few days, Thatcher said, but it's very inconvenient for everyone. There's another option, Lorna interrupted him. Yesterday, we discussed the possibility of placing her in a nursing home. Given what has happened, it seems like the most sensible solution. The social worker nodded. I understand. We have several good facilities where we can place someone on an emergency basis. However, for a permanent place, you will need to submit documents and wait in line. No, said Lorna. We have already looked into that. Here are the documents. She took the same folder she had brought yesterday out of her bag. It turned out that she had taken it with her when she came to see me that morning. Why? How could she have predicted the fire? Excellent. The social worker leafed through the brochures. Green Haven is an excellent facility. I can contact them right now to find out if they have any vacancies. He stepped aside and took out his phone. I stood and looked at what was left of my home. The firefighters rolled up their hoses. The fire was extinguished. All that remained was smoke, ashes, and the smell of burnt wood. "Everything's settled," said the social worker when he returned. "There's a room available at Green Haven. We can take you there right now. We'll take care of the paperwork on site." "Wait," I said. "I need time to think." "Mom," Thatcher took my hand, "there's nothing to think about. There's no home, nowhere to live. This is the only reasonable option." "Stop resisting," Lorna said sharply. "You're a burden to all of us. Don't you understand? We have our own problems, our own children, our own concerns. We can't drop everything and babysit you." There was silence. Even the firefighters standing nearby turned to look at Lorna. The social worker cleared his throat awkwardly. "Lorna," Thatcher said quietly. "What, Lorna?" she snapped. "Stop being hypocritical. We can't carry her around forever. She has no choice, and we have no choice." I looked at my sister-in-law, at her face red with anger, at Thatcher, who was looking away. There it was, his true face, without the mask of concern, without pretense. I was a burden, a hindrance, a problem to be gotten rid of. "Okay," I said quietly. "Let's go." The social worker breathed a sigh of relief. "Great. I'll ride with you in the car and explain all the formalities on the way." Thatcher and Lorna walked me to the emergency shelter vehicle. Before getting in, I turned around and looked at the ruins of my home one last time. Black walls, a collapsed roof, a pile of charred boards where yesterday I had welcomed guests on the porch. My home was gone. My past was gone. All that remained was ashes and a bitter taste in my mouth. The car started moving. I didn't look back. The Greenhaven nursing home was exactly as it appeared in the photos in the brochure. A neat two-story red brick building, a well-kept lawn, flower beds with autumn chrysanthemums. Everything was very civilized, calm, faceless, a place where old age passes quietly and unnoticed. I was greeted by the administrator, Mrs. Patterson, a woman in her 50s with a professional smile and a folder of documents under her arm. She expressed her condolences about the fire, explained the rules of the facility, and showed me the room. She spoke in a soft, soothing tone, the kind of tone usually used when talking to children or the seriously ill. The room was small but clean. There was a narrow bed, a nightstand, a chair, and a wardrobe. The window looked out onto an inner courtyard where several elderly people sat on benches and silently watched a small fountain. No one spoke. Everyone seemed lost in thought or simply waiting for something undefined. "Lunch is at 1 o'clock, dinner at 6, explained Mrs. Patterson. "Breakfast is served from 7 to 9, but most of our guests prefer 8 in the morning. Medical examinations every Wednesday, group activities on Tuesdays and Thursdays." I nodded and thought about how my life would now be subject to this schedule. No surprises, no personal decisions. Wake up for breakfast, wait for lunch, live to see dinner, and so on every day until death interrupts this dreary sequence. "Do you have your documents with you?" asked Mrs. Patterson. "No, they burned in the house." "That's okay. Your son promised to bring copies tomorrow. In the meantime, we'll arrange temporary accommodation." She handed me a pen and pointed to the lines in the contract where I had to sign. I signed my own death warrant. Once the formalities were settled, Mrs. Patterson left me alone. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked around. The walls were painted a neutral beige, no decorations, no personal belongings, the sterile cleanliness of a hospital room. I had nothing, literally nothing. The clothes I was wearing, jeans, a sweater, old shoes, a bag with documents and a wallet, nothing else in the whole world, 70 years of life fit into a small women's bag. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Thatcher arrived, alone, without Lorna. He knocked on the door and entered with a guilty expression on his face. Mom, how are you feeling? Fine, I replied. Is everything okay here? Is the staff okay? Yes. He sat down on a chair opposite the bed. We were silent for a few minutes. He was probably waiting for me to cry, complain, ask him to take me away from here, but I remained silent. Mom, I know it's hard, but believe me, it's better for everyone. You'll be calm and safe here, and we'll be able to take care of all the formalities. What formalities? Well, insurance, damage claims, selling the land, lots of things. So we got to the heart of the matter. Money. Do we have to sell the land too? Mom, be realistic. What are you going to do with an empty plot of land? Build a new house at 70? That's crazy. Thatcher spoke sensibly, logically, and yet insincerely. Behind his words, I heard Lorna's voice, her arguments, her plans. What about the money? The insurance will cover part of the damage. The plot is worth a good price. It's in a nice area. All in all, it will be a decent sum. It will be enough to live here for many years. And the rest? Thatcher hesitated. The rest? Well, we're family. We help each other. You understand? These are difficult times. I understood. The scenario hadn't changed. It had just accelerated. The house burned down. Fine. No need to persuade me to sell it. I'm in a nursing home. Great. I can manage the money without any worries. Everything was going according to plan. Their plan. When will you start processing the paperwork? I asked. I'm meeting with the insurance agent tomorrow morning. Then the notary, then the realtor. I want to get everything done quickly before the bureaucracy complicates things. Quickly. It's very important to do everything quickly before I start having doubts, before I change my mind, before I start asking uncomfortable questions. Where's Lorna? At home with the kids. She's very worried about you, but she couldn't come. Worried, of course. So worried that she can't face me after what I said today. Mom, Thatcher leaned toward me. I want you to understand. We're not your enemies. We're just trying to find the best way out of a difficult situation. I understand. If you need anything, call me. I'll visit you every week, like a caring son should. A check mark on his to-do list. He left after half an hour. He kissed me on the forehead and promised to bring the necessary things tomorrow. A toothbrush, a change of clothes, medicine, everything I needed for my new life within these four walls. The rest of the day was spent getting acquainted with the routine of the facility. Dinner in the communal dining room was a quiet, dreary ritual. Elderly people sat at small tables, chewing slowly on tasteless food, talking in hushed voices. I was introduced as Mrs. Crane, who joined our family after an accident. Several people nodded in sympathy. After dinner, there was an hour of rest in the common room. The TV was showing the news, but the sound was turned down so low that it was impossible to make out the words. Several old ladies were knitting. One old man was reading a newspaper. The rest just sat and stared into space. I tried to imagine myself as part of this picture. Myrtle Crane, 70 years old, former owner of the house, former mother, former wife, now just a resident of a nursing home, waiting for death in the company of other forgotten people. At 9 o'clock in the evening, lights out was announced. I lay down in a strange bed, in a strange room, under a strange blanket. Outside the window, the wind was howling, and somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking. The sounds of a strange life in which I no longer had a place. The next day, around noon, Thatcher and Lorna came. Together. Lorna looked tense, but held herself with dignity. Thatcher must have made her apologize for yesterday's outburst. Myrtle, dear, she began cautiously, I want to apologize for what I said yesterday. I was in shock. My nerves gave out. I didn't mean to hurt you. I nodded. A formal apology for sincere words. Yesterday she told the truth, and today she's trying to cover it up with politeness. Mom, Thatcher said, I met with the insurance agent. Good news. The insurance covers the full cost of the damage. The house was insured for $300,000. And the land? The realtor estimates it at $150,000. It's a prestigious area, high demand. We'll find a buyer quickly. That's a total of $450,000. Exactly what they had planned to get from selling the house. The fire even made their task easier. We've already calculated the cost of your upkeep here, Lorna added. $1,800 a month. That's $21,600 a year. With those expenses, the money will last for 20 years. 20 years in a nursing home. Until I'm 90. They calculated my death with the precision of an accountant. What if I live longer? Mom, don't be silly. Thatcher frowned. Who lives to be 90? What about the rest of the money? Lorna and Thatcher exchanged glances. The rest will be invested in the family budget, Lorna said diplomatically, for the children's education, paying off loans, a rainy day fund. A rainy day fund. They already had a rainy day. When they realized they couldn't get me to sell the house voluntarily, but they found a way out. Now there would be enough money for everything. College for the grandchildren, paying off the mortgage, a new car, a vacation in Europe. When will you get everything sorted out? I asked. Next week, Thatcher replied. I want to get this over with as soon as possible. As soon as possible. Before I understood anything. Before I had any questions. But the questions had already arisen. And not just questions. I'll bring the documents to the notary tomorrow, Thatcher continued. You don't mind if I represent your interests, do you? You don't need to go anywhere. I'll take care of everything myself. Of course, I don't need to go anywhere. Why should I? I'm an old, sick, helpless woman who is incapable of making decisions. I'd better stay in a nursing home and let my smart children manage my money. Okay, I said. Great, Lorna rejoiced. Then it's settled. You can live peacefully, and we'll take care of all the formalities. They left in good spirits. I could see it in their faces, in their gait, in the way they talked in the hallway. The plan worked perfectly. No one suspected anything. It all looked like a natural development after the accident. I was left alone in my little room, and for the first time in 2 days, allowed myself to think about what had really happened. The fire started in the morning when I was not at home. Thatcher and Lorna came to talk to me again, but for some reason they brought documents for admission to a nursing home. It was as if they knew in advance that they would be needed. Lorna immediately cut off any possibility of maneuvering. No talk of rebuilding the house, no alternatives, no delays. Only a nursing home, only a quick sale, only maximum profit. And most importantly, her words, stop resisting. You're a burden to all of us. Not anger, not a breakdown from stress, sincerity. Finally, the truth about what they think of me was spoken aloud. But the most interesting thing is the numbers. The insurance plus the sale of the land was exactly the amount they expected to get from selling the house, as if the fire was just another way to achieve the same goal. I sat in a strange room, surrounded by unfamiliar walls, and wondered if my son was capable of what I was beginning to suspect. Was he capable of setting his own mother's house on fire for money? Was Lorna capable of pushing him to do such a thing? The answer came naturally. Yes, he was capable, especially if he convinced himself that it was for his own good, that I would be better off in a nursing home, that the house would have to be sold anyway, that the old house is dangerous and the fire just hastened the inevitable. People are capable of many things when it comes to big money, and it's very easy to justify any action if you find the right words. I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I will take action before it's too late, before they get what they want. But today, I'll just lie here and think about how 70 years ago, I was born in a house that no longer exists, and about how some losses are impossible to forgive. On Thursday morning, the third day of my stay at the nursing home, the administration announced that I had a visitor. Attorney Daniel Fisher wanted to meet with me about drawing up a will. Mrs. Patterson led me into a small conference room where an unfamiliar man in his 50s was sitting at a table. Mrs. Crane? He stood up and extended his hand. Daniel Fisher, Fisher and Associates Law Firm. I'm very sorry to hear about your misfortune. I shook his hand and sat down opposite him. He was tall, graying, and dressed in an expensive suit. His face was intelligent and attentive. He spoke with a slight accent. Perhaps he was from the East. Thank you, but I didn't call a lawyer. I understand your confusion. Sybil Harrison from Portland asked me to contact you. She is concerned about you and believes it is necessary to clarify some legal issues related to your property. Sybil, the niece of the late Albert, who called me the night after my birthday. So she wasn't just warning me about the realtor's call. What exactly is she concerned about? Mrs. Harrison has received several calls from realtors offering to buy her property in Salem, your property. She wants to know if you are aware of these offers. I remained silent. Mr. Fisher took a folder of documents out of his briefcase. Let me refresh your memory. On March 18th of this year, you contacted Henderson's notary office to make changes to your real estate documents. Do you remember? March 18th, 6 months ago. I remembered that day very well. At that time, I was just beginning to suspect the true intentions of Thatcher and Lorna, but I already felt that the relationships in the family were changing for the worse. I remember. According to these documents, ownership of the house and land at 87 Chestnut Street was transferred to Sybil Harrison. The documents are notarized, and all formalities have been complied with. Mr. Fisher placed copies of the documents in front of me. My signature, the notary's seal, the date, everything was in order. Therefore, he continued, at the time of the fire, the house belonged not to you, but to Mrs. Harrison. The insurance compensation, if any, should be paid to her, not to your relatives. I nodded. The plan I had begun to hatch 6 months ago, when I realized what was going on, was working. But I don't know if Sybil took out insurance on the house. She didn't. Your policy automatically expired when the ownership changed. No new policy was taken out. That means there will be no insurance payout. The $300,000 that Thatcher and Lorna were counting on has vanished. What about the land? The land belongs to Mrs. Harrison. She can do with it as she sees fit. She has the right to sell it, build on it, or leave it vacant. Does Thatcher know about this? Not yet. Mrs. Harrison and I decided to talk to you first, to find out the circumstances of the fire, and then notify the interested parties. Mr. Fisher put the documents in a folder and looked at me intently. Mrs. Crane, please don't take this the wrong way, but Mrs. Harrison has some suspicions about the cause of the fire. She asked me to clarify a few things. What exactly? Did your son and his wife know about the change of ownership? No. Were they expecting to inherit the house and land? Yes. And did they insist that you move into a nursing home? They did. Mr. Fisher nodded, as if checking items off a pre-prepared list. I see. Tell me, was the fire really an accident? I was silent for a long time. It was a very important question. A lot could depend on my answer. I don't know, I said finally. I wasn't home when it started. Thatcher and Lorna say they arrived and saw smoke. Maybe that's true. Maybe, Mr. Fisher repeated neutrally. Or maybe not. In any case, that's not the most important thing right now. The main thing is that your relatives are counting on money that doesn't belong to them. What do you suggest? For starters, let them know the real situation. Let them know that it wasn't your house that burned down, but someone else's, that there will be no insurance payout, that the land doesn't belong to you either. And then, it depends on what they do. If they try to contest the documents or accuse you of fraud, we'll defend ourselves. All the documents are in order. There are no complaints about them. Mr. Fisher took another folder out of his briefcase, thicker than the previous one. Speaking of documents, Mrs. Harrison asked me to give you copies of the bank statements. In March, you not only re-registered the property, but also dealt with other financial matters, right? Yes, I did. Bank accounts, deposits, investment portfolio, everything Albert had accumulated throughout his life, and that was supposed to be my inheritance. All of that was also transferred. Please remind me of the details. 3 bank accounts were transferred to the name of Sybil Harrison. The total amount is $187,000. The deposit account at First National Bank is $63,000. An investment portfolio with Merrill Lynch, $121,000, total $371,000, plus a plot of land worth $150,000, more than $500,000 that Thatcher and Lorna considered theirs. Do I have access to these accounts? No, only Mrs. Harrison. It was your direct instruction to completely exclude the possibility of access to the funds by other persons. Correct. At the time, I didn't know how far my son and daughter-in-law were willing to go, but I already understood that money greatly changes people. Better to be safe than sorry. What if something happens to Sybil? The funds will go to an animal charity. That was also specified in the documents. Mr. Fisher folded the papers and looked at his watch. Mrs. Crane, I have one more question, a delicate one. How are you financially secure now? I have a pension and some small savings for current expenses. It's enough for now. Mrs. Harrison is offering to help you. She can cover the costs of your living expenses here or anywhere else you choose. That's very generous of her. She feels obligated. After all, the funds were originally yours. She's just a temporary administrator. Temporary administrator. Interesting wording. So Sybil doesn't consider herself the owner of my fortune, although legally it belongs to her. I need to think about it. Of course. But the decision on whether to inform your relatives about the change of ownership must be made quickly. They have already begun processing the paperwork to receive insurance payments. What will happen when they find out the truth? Nothing good, Mr. Fisher replied honestly. Scandal, mutual accusations, possibly attempts to challenge your decision in court. But legally, they can't do anything. The documents are flawless. And morally? Morally, Mr. Fisher shrugged. You disposed of your property as you wished. You didn't deceive anyone or promise anyone anything. If your relatives were counting on an inheritance, that's their problem, not yours. He stood up and gathered his papers. Mrs. Crane, think about Mrs. Harrison's offer. She is prepared to provide you with everything you need. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to. And what does she get in return? The satisfaction of helping a relative of her late husband, and the moral right to call herself a decent person. After the lawyer left, I sat in the meeting room for a long time, digesting the information I had received. The plan I had begun to implement 6 months ago had worked better than I had expected. The house was burned down, but there would be no insurance money. The land does not belong to me, but to Sybil. The bank accounts are also inaccessible to Thatcher and Lorna. They had expected to receive more than $500,000. Instead, they will receive nothing, and they will find out at the most inopportune moment, when they have already spent time and money on processing a non-existent inheritance. Is this fair? Thatcher is my son, after all. Over the past 45 years, he has done a lot of good for me. He was an obedient child, helped around the house, and took care of his father during his illness. Can a few months of greed really erase all that? But then I remembered Lorna's words. Stop resisting. You're a burden to all of us. And how they planned my life without me, and how quickly they agreed to take me to a nursing home right from the scene of the fire. No, it's not greed, it's betrayal. They betrayed me first. They decided I was getting in the way of their plans and got rid of me in the most civilized way possible. Now it's my turn to show that old age doesn't mean helplessness. I got up and went to my room. Tomorrow or the day after, Thatcher will find out the truth. It will be interesting to see his face when he realizes that all his plans have fallen apart. In the meantime, I'll just wait. After all, I've already spent 6 months waiting for justice. I can wait a little longer. On Friday morning, I sat in the living room of the nursing home and pretended to read the newspaper. In reality, I was waiting. Mr. Fisher had promised to contact the insurance company before noon and inform them of the change of ownership. After that, events should unfold quickly. Around 11 o'clock, a woman approached the administrator and asked something excitedly, waving her arms. I couldn't hear the words, but from the tone of her voice, I knew something had happened. A few minutes later, Mrs. Patterson came to me. Mrs. Crane, you have an urgent visitor, your sister-in-law. Lorna was waiting for me in the same conference room where the lawyer had been yesterday. Her face was white as chalk. Her hands were shaking. She didn't even say hello. She got straight to the point. Myrtle, what the hell is going on? I just got a call from the insurance company. They say the house didn't belong to you, but to some Sybil Harrison from Oregon. Is that true? It's true, I replied calmly. How is that possible? When? Why didn't you tell us? Why should I? You planned my life so carefully without me that I decided not to interfere. Lorna sank into a chair as if her legs had given way. Do you realize what you've done? We've already filed for insurance payments. Thatcher met with the realtor to discuss selling the property. We were counting on that money. I understand. How do you understand? Lorna's voice grew louder. We have a mortgage. The kids are in college. We plan to pay off all our debts with your inheritance. My inheritance. How easily she said those words, as if it were a matter of course. Lorna, I didn't promise anyone anything. The house was mine, and I had the right to dispose of it as I saw fit. But you knew that after your death it would go to Thatcher. It's only natural. A son inherits his mother's property. After my death, I'm still alive. Myrtle, you can't do this. Lorna jumped up and began pacing around the small room. We have a family, children, obligations. We can't be left without money. You weren't. You have a salary, your own house, your own savings. You just don't have my money. Those are different things. Your money? Lorna turned sharply toward me. How is it yours when you're in a nursing home? When you can't take care of yourself? When we have to solve your problems? No one forced you. No one forced us? Who was supposed to take you in after the fire? Who was supposed to find you a place here? Who will visit you, take care of you? I looked at my sister-in-law's face, red with anger, and suddenly realized that I didn't feel sorry for her at all. Lorna wasn't angry because she had lost the opportunity to help me. She was angry because she had lost money, and that was the only reason. Lorna, sit down. Let's talk calmly. She sat down, but there was no calmness in her posture. Her fists were clenched, her jaws were clenched, her eyes burned with indignation. Explain to me when you transferred the house to this, what's her name? Harrison? In March. Why in March? What happened in March? I paused, trying to remember. In March, Lorna once again brought up the fact that I needed to think about the future. At the time, it still sounded like she was concerned, but I was already beginning to understand the true purpose of these conversations. In March, I realized that you don't see me as a person, but as a source of money. That's not true. It's true, Lorna, and today you confirmed it. You didn't come here to find out how I was feeling or to support me after losing my home. You came here to find out where the money was. Lorna opened her mouth to argue, but I continued. 2 days ago, you yelled that I was a burden to everyone. Yesterday, Thatcher planned to get $450,000 and spend it on family needs. And today, you accuse me of disposing of my own money as I see fit. We wanted the best. For whom? For me or for yourselves? Lorna fell silent. Apparently, she finally realized that I understood everything. What will happen now with this, Harrison? Will she get the whole amount? That's none of your business, Lorna. How is it none of my business? What about you? Who will pay for your stay here if you don't have any money? I have my pension. Your pension won't cover the nursing home? Lorna started getting worked up again. $1,800 a month, and your pension is $700. Where will you get the difference? Interesting. 2 days ago, she was ready to support me for 20 years with my own money. Now that it was clear that the family budget would have to pay, her concern had evaporated. That's my problem, Lorna. No, it's ours. Because if you don't have money, I'll have to support you. And I have enough worries of my own. There it was, the truth. The final, irrevocable truth about what they thought of me. At that moment, the door swung open and Thatcher entered. His face was darker than a cloud. Mom, what games are you playing? I got a call from the insurance company, then from the notary's office. They say the house belonged to some distant relative. Sybil Harrison, your father's niece. Since when? Since March. Thatcher sank heavily into a chair next to his wife. Why didn't you tell us? Why should I? You planned the sale of my property so carefully that I didn't want to spoil your fun. Mom, we weren't planning any sale. We wanted to provide you with a decent retirement. With my money. Whose else? He snapped. I earn a mechanic's salary. Lorna earns an insurance agent's salary. We live from paycheck to paycheck. If it weren't for the prospect of inheritance, we would never have been able to afford a decent nursing home for you. Finally, honesty. No concern for my well-being, just the calculation that my money would solve their problems. So, you originally planned to spend my inheritance on my own upkeep? What's wrong with that? Lorna regained her composure and went on the offensive again. The money was just sitting there anyway. Better to put it to good use. Good use for whom? For everyone. You would have received good care, and we would have gotten rid of our debts. And the rest of the money? What rest? But Lorna already realized she had said too much. You calculated it yourself. $21,000 a year for my upkeep, $450,000 in total. Even if I live to be 90, there will be more than $200,000 left. Where was it supposed to go? Thatcher and Lorna exchanged glances. Mom, Thatcher said slowly, carefully, we really do have serious financial problems. The mortgage, the kids' education, living expenses. We were hoping your inheritance would help us get back on our feet. And you decided not to wait for my death? We didn't decide anything. It's just that when the fire happened. Happened? I looked closely at my son. Are you sure it happened? Thatcher turned pale. What do you mean? It's a strange coincidence. The fire starts just when you need the money most, just when I refuse to sell the house voluntarily, and just when you come to me with the paperwork for the nursing home. Mom, you're out of your mind. Are you accusing me of arson? I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just pointing out some curious coincidences. Lorna jumped up. Myrtle, you've gone too far. We were trying to help you, and you're accusing us of a crime. What crime? If the house burned down accidentally, then there is no crime. But what if it wasn't an accident? Thatcher's voice trembled. What if someone really did set the house on fire, and that house didn't belong to you, but to someone else? That's destruction of someone else's property. A criminal offense, I nodded, with a real prison sentence. There was silence. Thatcher and Lorna sat pale, exchanging frightened glances. Mom, Thatcher said barely audibly, if there are suspicions of arson, there will be an investigation. Police, forensic experts, interrogations, possibly. And if the investigators determine that the fire was not accidental, then the guilty parties will be punished. Lorna grabbed her husband's hand. Thatcher, we have to go, right away. We need to call a lawyer and figure out what to do next. They got up and were about to leave. At the door, Thatcher turned around. Mom, no matter what happens between us, you're still my mother. If you need any help. Thank you, I said. But I think you're going to need help soon. They left, leaving me alone in the conference room. I sat there thinking about how the wheel of justice had begun to turn, slowly but surely. Thatcher and Lorna had expected to get more than $500,000 and solve all their problems at my expense. Instead, they were facing the prospect of criminal prosecution and the complete collapse of their financial plans. Was it fair? Maybe too harsh. But then I remembered how they had planned my life without me. They talked about my money as if it already belonged to them. They rejoiced at the fire because it saved them from having to persuade me to sell the house. No, not too harsh. Just right. For the next 3 weeks, I lived in a nursing home and waited for news. It came gradually, in bits and pieces, from various sources. Mrs. Patterson relayed gossip she had heard from other relatives of the residents. Mr. Fisher called with official reports. Even the local newspaper, the Salem Herald, printed a small article about the suspicious fire and the investigation that had begun. The first news came a week later. Sybil Harrison filed a report with the police about the destruction of her property. Since the house was insured in the name of the previous owner and no new policy had been taken out, the damage amounted to the full value of the property, $300,000. With such a sum, the case automatically fell into the category of serious crimes. The second piece of news was even more interesting. The fire investigation determined that the fire started simultaneously at 3 points on the first floor, in the living room, kitchen, and hallway. There were so many signs of arson that there was no doubt it was intentional. Someone had deliberately doused the house with flammable liquid and set it alight in different places so that the fire would spread faster. When I was told about this, I felt a strange sense of relief. So my intuition had not failed me. Thatcher and Lorna had indeed burned down my house. It was not an accident, not an unfortunate incident, not a problem with the fireplace. It was a cold, calculated arson to collect insurance money. The third piece of news concerned the arsonists themselves. Thatcher was called in for questioning 3 times. The first time was as a witness who discovered the fire. The second time was as an interested party who was counting on the inheritance. The third time was as a suspect in the arson. Lorna had not been touched yet, but her colleagues at the insurance company said she was acting very nervously. She was making mistakes in documents, snapping at customers, and looking as if she hadn't slept in weeks. Her bosses were already talking about possible dismissal. And then came the most important news. The bank had begun foreclosure proceedings on Thatcher and Lorna's house for non-payment of the mortgage. Mr. Fisher explained to me what was happening. The mortgage on their house was $280,000. The monthly payment was $2,300. With their combined income of $4,800 a month, this payment was almost half of their family budget. Before the fire, they had expected to receive $450,000 from insurance and the sale of the land. That would have been enough to pay off the loan in full and still have money left over for their children's education and living expenses. Now that it was clear that there would be no money, their financial situation became critical. They had not paid the loan for 2 months. At first, they hoped to receive the insurance money quickly. Then they tried to borrow money from Lorna's relatives. But when the relatives learned of the arson allegations, they refused to help. No one wanted to be associated with potential criminals. Jessica and Michael were forced to take a leave of absence from college. They simply did not have the money to pay for tuition. Jessica returned home and got a job as a saleswoman in a shopping center. Michael found a job as a courier. Their dreams of medical school and graduate school were put on hold indefinitely. The worst part was that the lawyer they hired to defend them against the arson charges demanded a $50,000 retainer. A good lawyer is expensive, especially in criminal cases with possible jail time, and they didn't have the money. I learned these details gradually from various sources, and each piece of news brought me a strange sense of satisfaction. Not joy. I'm not a sadist after all, but satisfaction that justice had been restored. They wanted money and ended up with none. They wanted to get rid of me, and now they themselves had become outcasts. They planned a happy future at my expense and ended up with their lives ruined through their own fault. A month later, Thatcher came to see me for the last time. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, his face was gaunt, and his eyes were so tired, as if he hadn't slept for weeks. His expensive clothes had been replaced by a simple sweater and worn jeans. He even had a different car, not a silver sedan, but an old pickup truck. "Mom," he said, sitting down across from me in the conference room, "I need to tell you something." I waited silently. "We're losing the house. In a week, the bank will put it up for auction." "I'm sorry." "The kids have dropped out of school. Lorna got fired from her job. I'm facing criminal charges." "I know. The lawyer says that with the evidence and motive, I'll probably be convicted. 3 to 5 years in prison. For burning down someone else's house. A fair punishment." Thatcher looked up at me. There was pain and despair in his eyes, but no remorse. "You knew, didn't you? You knew we burned the house down?" "I suspected it. And you didn't stop us?" "How could I have stopped you? Tell you that the house wasn't mine anymore? You would have just postponed the arson until after my death, when the inheritance was settled." Thatcher was silent for a long time, digesting my words. "You know what's the worst part?" he finally said. "It's not prison. It's not losing the house. The worst part is realizing that I've become a person capable of burning down my own mother's house for money." "You didn't become that way overnight, Thatcher. It happened gradually. First, there were hints that the house was too big for me. Then there were talks about a nursing home. Then there were open demands to sell the property. And the arson was just the final chord. But you're my mother. I was your mother. And then I became an obstacle to money." "Mom?" Thatcher leaned across the table toward me. "Can you forgive me?" I looked at this 45-year-old man who was once my little boy. I remembered his childhood hugs, his first words, my pride in his successes at school. And then I remembered his cold eyes when he was planning to sell my house. Lorna's words about me being a burden, their satisfied faces as they discussed how to divide the insurance money. "No," I said quietly. "I can't." "Why?" "Because you're not apologizing for what you did. You're apologizing for getting caught." Thatcher leaned back in his chair as if he had been slapped. "That's not fair." "It is. If the plan had worked, if you had gotten the money, You would never have come to me with an apology. You would have been happy that you had solved your problem so cleverly. Maybe you're right, he said, standing up to leave. But I'm still your son. You are, I agreed. Unfortunately. After he left, I sat alone for a long time, thinking about what had happened between us. 70 years ago, I gave birth to this man, loved him more than my own life, and was ready to do anything for his happiness. And in the end, he betrayed me for money. Maybe I was too cruel. Maybe I should have given him another chance. But then I remembered how they planned my life without me, how they rejoiced at the fire because it freed them from having to persuade me, how quickly they agreed to take me to a nursing home right from the scene of the accident. No, not too cruel, just right. A month later, Mr. Fisher gave me the final results. Thatcher was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Lorna got 2 years probation as an accomplice. Their house was sold at auction for debt. Jessica and Michael moved to Lorna's parents' house in another state, and I stayed in the nursing home. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Sybil offered to let me move in with her in Portland or rent a nice apartment in Salem, but I refused. It was quiet and peaceful here, and no one betrayed my trust for money. Every morning I woke up in my little room and thought that justice did exist in this world after all. Sometimes it needs a little help, but it exists. I also thought that the most painful losses are not the loss of a home or money. The most painful loss is the loss of faith in the people you love. But even this loss can be survived, especially when you know that the traitors got what they deserved.